I'm entering Phil Duwel's studio in Pawleys Island with all his photographs. Ah, there he is now.
Hey John, how you doing?
Hi, Sandra.
Hi, how are you?
Well, welcome to the gallery, and right now we're printing off one of our Cuban pictures. Actually, it's my wife's picture of the waterfront down there.
I've come to talk with Phil and Sandra today about their travels to Cuba. Phil going with his wife Deb many times, and recently with Sandra.
Outstanding, outstanding. Hold it up for him there. And we have a nice picture
Isn't
of
that
the
fantastic?
Cuban waterfront.
Very good.
And these scenes are all over the place. What I mean is, you turn around and you've got another picture someplace else. You got a picture here, you got a picture there.
Mm-hmm.
So how about we just kind of settle around the table and we can start talking a little bit about Cuba.
Great.
Okay. In the streets, there are literally hundreds and hundreds of pictures to take. And one of the things noted within the Cuban structure is their street arts, not only on the walls, but also into the entranceways of the various houses and residential area places. This is typical of some of the more elaborate street art that you will see here in Cuba.
Some of the cukes, that's the money system there in Cuba. At this point, it's about a 1-to-1, so a $10 cuke, 10 cuke would be equal to $10. When you go to Cuba, if you're exchanging money, they don't take American money. You either need to take euros or Canadian money.
Okay. Let me add something about the cukes. If you bring down American money, you exchange it and you get a 3% exchange rate. But because it's American money, there's a 10% surcharge because it's American money. So you actually take $1 American and get 87 cents worth of cuke. If you bring in euros, you get a 3% exchange rate and no surcharge because it's not American money. We're in Old Havana. One of the things the government has done is maintain the oldness. New construction is not permitted, nor is money really available to do new construction. So you're going to see many what we would call derelict buildings, etc. Very colorful, very nice. Sandra has a number of pictures, and she's going to kick it off with one of the typical buildings here in Cuba. Sandra?
This is something you see that's fairly typical in Old Havana, where the upper stories are in very bad shape. The roof looks like it's missing. You can see through to the other side, and yet in the first couple of floors, people are living there. And you see this like all over some of the 5-6-story buildings. The first two you can see through, and the rest of them have residents in them. And you can tell because there's laundry across the balconies. And I love the contrast here. The old car, this is an old Pontiac, and I love the look of it against the blue building. Pretty much everywhere you go in Cuba, all the restaurants, you have musicians, and this is typical. These gentlemen are putting together their CDs, and as I say, the restaurants, and of course they pass the hat, and you'll find them on the street corners, and there again, that's how they make their living. But with income in Cuba so low, this is an excellent business for them. I loved this old guy fishing. The fish he's pulling in are maybe 4 inches long, little tiny fish. But after this, he turns around and gives us a big smile. But this is typical of what you see. You notice no poles or anything, just some string and a hook.
That's amazing.
This is probably the newest in cameras. An old cardboard box, lots and lots of tape. It's actually a pinhole camera. And he took our pictures for, I think it was $1 a piece. And he also develops it right there. But it was just hilarious to see this big cardboard box covered in tape. So, all of our cameras are kind of worthless compared to this one. It was fun. This gentleman, I loved that face, selling newspapers. I have one. It's in Spanish. I couldn't read it, but it was worth it just to deal with him a little bit. Street photography there is amazing, and the people The faces are just amazing. This is, you can see the city of Havana across the bay. This is a little fishing village on the other side, or across the river. You go by ferry to get there. And they were unloading fish. I don't have a picture here of what they were getting, but they were unloading huge tuna and some other fish that just about dragged the ground when they walked away. Garlic and onions. You see these carts all around. And this young lady's walking by and she's having a pass made at her. He's obviously quite interested in her. But it makes a really colorful picture with all of the garlic. Typical, again, of these old buildings, there's a little bit of laundry hanging there. In most of the houses, you're going to see the grill covered in laundry, and there are clotheslines all over the place. You can see some of the clothesline here. And you have something to keep the birds or the other people, I think, from getting in. But here again, this is a derelict building. You can even see a plant growing in the concrete. You won't find supermarkets down in Cuba. You find these little shops like this one, and where the locals come to do their buying. You'll notice, too, the fruit is very ripe, and this is something that makes it so good when you get to Cuba. They don't ship it green and tasteless. It's really delicious. And she's obviously doing her morning shopping. This is in a little fishing village that was off of Trinidad. And this is just a sunset shot. It was really lovely there, very peaceful. At night, you'll see this whole bay filled with fishermen. This was in, I believe that was in Havana also. Not sure what the man was selling, but bicycles and little carts are the transportation there. You don't see a whole lot of big trucks. Another picture at La Boca. The color was just beautiful. This isn't even enhanced. This is the way it came out of the camera. This is part of another scene of the boats docked, and I love the poles that they use. They use whatever materials are around because these are people who just don't have a lot of money. But the fish they bring in are amazing, and fishing is done just within sight of land. It's amazing how big the fish they bring in would be. We'd have to go way out into the Gulf Stream to get the same thing. There again, this is a little cart. You see lots of horses used. Carts are used for transporting all sorts of food stuff and whatever the people need. And there again, you see in the background one of the old cars. These old cars are used for taxis. You see them as very pristine in the pictures, but most of them are pretty derelict, and you never know when you take one of these taxis what condition it's going to be in or whether you're going to get to your destination, but it makes it a fun thing to try. Another of La Boca, and you can see farmland across the bay and the mountains in the background. Beautiful, beautiful little setting. Another of La Boca. Here again is an old building. It looks as if they were maybe starting to restore it because the paint on the front is too good. But you can see everything inside is falling down. But the money that's coming in from American tourists are going to help get some of these places restored and make life a lot better for the people. This was there again in Old Havana. One of the parks, and you see this sort of thing going on all the time, these guys playing chess, and lots of soccer being played too in these areas. This is back on that wall in Havana and a sunset, and if you look closely you'll see the guy smoking one of their cigars, for which Cuba's known.
Beautiful picture.
Thank you. And here's a little art gallery, and the flags you see are canvas. They painted them themselves, and lots of graffiti around. It's one of those side streets. As you explore the side streets of Old Havana, you never know what you're going to find. across the street was a tree growing out of the side of the building, and the tree was probably 20 feet high. A night scene in the whole old Havana. I liked the shadows in it. You could walk these streets in the middle of the night and feel very, very safe. That was one of the things that I particularly noted there. I loved that shot. I'm going to try it probably in black and white, but I don't think I would like to try those stairs. They're a little rusty, but I think somebody's living in one of those apartments. Just look at all the old cars. This is from a hill as they're heading into Havana, and that's the bay across that you see. Another old door. And this is probably my favorite shot from the street photography. This lady looks like she's had a very hard life, and she's up probably 3 stories and just watching the world go by.
Okay.
Good. Travel to Cuba. Always been on my bucket list. And the opportunity came in this past February to go down to Cuba, and I had an individual who was going to help me see around the city. What I found out that travel to Cuba was as easy as going to the Grand Canyon. I looked up Delta. Delta had an airfare out of Charlotte through Atlanta and down to Havana, Cuba. The airfare was $279. I elected to do Comfort Air for another $40, and what that did was got me through all of the long lines into the shorter lines. I bought a Cuban visa through Delta for $50. I also had to have medical insurance while in Cuba, and that was included in the airline ticket. So I got on the plane at Charlotte. I walked into the Atlantic terminal off the plane over to where the air was going to Cuba. They gave me a piece of paper. I signed it, and it says I'm going to Cuba for a people-to-people regime. They handed me my ticket. They handed me my visa. I got off in Havana. I went through customs just like you would in any other place. Give them your passport, give them your visa. You go through, you pick up your luggage, then you go through their security. They want to make sure that you are not bringing any contraband into it. You walk out of their security, you turn either right or left. They have 2 baggage areas. You pick up your baggage, and there you are in Cuba. It's as simple as that. There
Amazing.
is no hassle or anything else.
I'm
Cheers.
surprised people are not more aware of that.
Well, originally, before Obama got started, you had to go down by tour. Now you can arrange your own tour, and that's exactly what I had done. I had arranged my own tour. I had taken a look at what various museums were there. I made some contacts with various photographers, and I had a guide that I had learned about who was going to show me parts of Havana. So I was set, and I was going down on the people-to-people. Easy. What we call the barge restaurant in the harbor of Havana, and we have the Venezuelan trading ship in port. It's their first night in port, all lit up, just absolutely gorgeous. Approximately 350 midshipmen were on board this particular vessel. You saw them all about. Just another scene here in Havana, Cuba. In walking through the streets of Havana, this is a typical scene that you will see. It's basically unkept buildings, what we would call derelict buildings. And on this particular side, they have set up an automobile shop. And in the automobile shop, something that really fascinated me was the wall art, or the street art, as I noted. Interesting. Street art all over the place. I have a project in order to do so, making a street art project, and this is one example of it. Graffiti, as you would note it. This is a wall outside of the Hemingway restaurant in Old Havana, and it has become a practice that you leave a note on the walls. I've been there in February, and I was there again in May, and it appears as if they come and they paint over these things so that you can start anew. So you won't see very many from 1954. One of the things that I was really astounded was that they have a beer making capability down there, and this happened to be one in a restaurant in Old Havana, beer on the spot, and they serve beer in what we call a yard of, or a tanker that's a yard long. They put ice in the tube and it has a spigot on the bottom. Nice. Just a contrast, this is a taxi that they use throughout. Taxis cost about $1 to go, say, a half mile or something like this. And again, this is the entrance to a residential home. Can you believe that? There are street lights within Cuba, few and far between. They are obeyed. You might notice the Capitol-looking building in the background. It is a replica of the United States Capitol found in D.C. It is the same size, texture, and everything else. Absolutely amazing. Also, please note that although it is an impoverished country, notice the cleanliness of the streets that you see, and throughout all of the pictures that I'm going to be showing you. Sandra showed you a picture of the guys coming off the boats and talked about the big fish and everything else. This is a picture of the big fish that she was alluding to. Cars date back to the 54, 55 for the old times, and then they started picking up some Russian models. This is a typical scene where you'll see a car pulled over to the side of the road, and here is a street side brake job underway. Beautiful looking little car. They have a classic club within Old Havana. It is done on a point system, and if you adhere to their point system, you get to be a member of their points of their classic car idea. Pretty cool. I took this picture for the obvious reason. It's colorful and everything else, but note the iPhone being charged within the car itself. Churches. They don't exactly abound throughout Havana, but many are colorful, well preserved for the like, and this is one example of it. A place to definitely go and see. Just walk in, usually open from about 9 o'clock in the morning until around 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You have individuals throughout Cuba that make their monies for posing for tourists. This is one such individual down in the city of Trinidad. It cost me a cuke, $1, in order to take this and about 3 other pictures. Pretty cool, eh? Old cars abound. There's about 160,000 old cars within Cuba, I am told. Some well maintained, some not as well maintained. If you stand on a corner in Havana, such as this one, in the space of 15 minutes, I would take 60, 70, 80 pictures of old cars passing on by. Very, very entertaining. This is the Plaza de San Francisco. It is in Old Havana. It is a tourist area. One of the nice things that you can do is you can walk inside the church. They have a rectory inside, but you can climb all the way up to the top bell tower and get one heck of a view of Old Havana. By the way, I'm going to go back and mention the horse carriages. They are for hire. They run usually anywhere from $30 to $50 an hour. This is a typical plaza within Old Havana. This is part of the group that I traveled with in May. It's got restaurants, it's got schools, it has live bands, it's got residential areas, and it's got 3 hotels. So it's typical, I would say, of parts of Spain, etc. This is our taxi driver that we had for the majority of our stay during May. His name is Eddie. He's got himself an old Dodge. It works like a champ. He's very, very proud of it. I one time, and only one time, happened to slam his car door. And I was told in no uncertain terms that this car door was to be shut correctly. And ever since then, not only did I remind myself, but I had 4 women tell me to shut the door correctly. This is the inside of a house in Trinidad. You will note that you immediately walk into a foyer and you can go all the way back and see the living room. Rather colorful. This is another house. This is in Old Havana. You have back in here is a entrance to a residence, and this is also a entrance to a residence. I physically saw a couple of people going into their residence. It looks old and decrepit, but it works for them. Looking into the kitchen, looking into their living room from it. Notice that you just walk right into the door off of the street. Meat markets. Meat is sold on a daily basis. Most of the houses have no refrigeration, no ice boxes, things like this. So they will butcher an animal, say at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, cut it up. The meat market will open at 7 o'clock in the morning, and most of the produce will be sold by the end of the day. That produce that is not sold is ground up and made into a sausage. This is a typical scene in one of the outlying towns. It's Trinidad. Notice again the cleanliness of the streets. Notice that the oldness of the buildings. There's nothing really new or modern about it. But also notice the cart. The cart is used throughout Cuba as a means of transportation. This is a nighttime food stand. They serve a delicious bakery. Basically, it is almost like a fluffed up pancake covered with the sugar and just delicious. Restaurants. Restaurants abound now in Cuba since about 5 years ago. It used to be you visited Cuba and everything was a government cafeteria controlled by the government having a set standard. 5 years ago they loosened it, and now you can have a private enterprise called a restaurant. We ate. A typical meal in a restaurant like this would be anywhere from $7, say, to $12, 3-course meal, wine being extra. Notice tablecloths, service was excellent. The only thing that we constantly did was drink bottled water. This is the inside of what we call the art and the crafts section in Old Havana. It is an aircraft size hangar. This particular thing shows a coconut milk stand, but notice the art stalls to either side. Quite a collection of art. Art is bargainable. It is sold just on the canvas, a fair price. Really, really, really a place to go to when you're in Old Havana. Going across the bay, looking back at the Capitol, again you can see it looks and is the same replica as ours is. Naturally, the picture has the interest because of the goats. But notice the size of the city, not small by any means. Taken from the wall is the Malecon. It surrounds on the seaside. It is where the tourists and especially the Cubans gather in the evening for conversation, for socializing, for meeting the other ladies, and for the spectacular sunsets. Probably went there 6-7 times in the 14 days that I was there. This is a restaurant overlooking the back bay. It's got a couple of 3 tables up there. Ate a beautiful meal for around $9. Let me give you one more here. This is typical of the wiring found in many of the buildings. Not up to your standards, but it works for them. All over the place. And this is the inside of our Airbnb house that we stayed in Cuba. I recommend going Airbnb versus hotels. Hotels are very expensive. Airbnb is inexpensive. And that'll do it for now. Thank you.